If you are a landlord or a renter in Connecticut, it's essential to be familiar with the Connecticut rental laws. These laws outline the state's rules regarding security deposits, late fees, evictions, and more. And they can help determine the results of disputes that may arise in a lease. We're eForms, the world's largest online database of fillable legal forms. In this video, we'll cover topics including different types of lease agreements, what information landlords have to provide tenants, and how the eviction process works in Connecticut. Be sure to watch to the end of this video to find a link to create a lease agreement that meets Connecticut requirements and can be customized to your situation. First, where are rental laws found and when do they apply? Most Connecticut rental laws are contained in a set of state laws called Rights and Responsibilities of Landlord and Tenant. These are rules that all landlords and tenants are bound by. But in many cases, when there is a question about obligations between a landlord and a tenant, the answer won't necessarily be found in the state law. Instead, it will be found in the lease agreement that the landlord and tenant sign. Lease agreements are contracts that outline the terms under which a property is rented to a tenant. The state's rental laws are more like standards that the various parts of a lease agreement cannot fall below. If a tenant is living in a property and the landlord is collecting rent, but there is no lease agreement, the state's rules will serve as a kind of de facto lease agreement. So, what kind of leases are allowed in Connecticut? For residential property, there are many different possible types of leases. Here are the two most common. A standard lease agreement is the most widely used rental contract. It's commonly a one-year fixed period, meaning the tenant and the landlord both expect that rent will be paid for at least 1 year. A month-to-month lease is an agreement between a landlord and a tenant that automatically renews every month. Often, standard lease agreements will convert into month-to-month leases when their first year concludes. A month-to-month lease ends by either the landlord or the tenant when they give notice. Unlike many states, Connecticut does not require a minimum amount of time needed to give valid notice, but it's recommended for the landlord or tenant to provide at least 30 days before termination. Connecticut rental laws also set out the required disclosures that a landlord must make to a tenant before the tenant occupies the property. Connecticut disclosures are similar to those of other states, including providing information about lead paint, a means of contacting the landlord, and a copy of the state's landlord-tenant laws. Connecticut landlords also must disclose whether a rental property is part of a common interest community, such as a condo complex. The state's laws also contain obligations regarding security deposits. Landlords may request a maximum of 2 months' rent if the tenant is under the age of 62, or a maximum of 1 month's rent if the tenant is over the age of 62. After the lease is over, a landlord must return the money within 30 days or within 15 days of receiving the tenant's forwarding address, whichever comes later. Connecticut's landlord-tenant laws also address evictions. Eviction is the legal process of removing a tenant and must always be done through the court system. So-called self-help evictions are illegal in every state. Evictions can occur when a tenant violates a term of the lease agreement for the property, but the process differs depending on what the tenant allegedly did or failed to do. If a tenant fails to pay rent, Connecticut law gives tenants a 9-day grace period before landlords may begin the eviction process. Once this passes, the landlord may provide the tenant with an eviction notice, stating that all money owed is due within 3 days, or the landlord may terminate the lease. If a tenant violates some other provision of the lease, such as failing to keep the premises clean, then the landlord may provide the tenant with a notice stating that the problem must be corrected within 15 days, or the landlord may terminate the lease. If there are multiple tenants on a property, Connecticut law requires that each one receive a copy of the eviction notice. If the tenants fail to pay the money, correct the lease violation, or don't respond at all, then the landlord can petition a court to have law enforcement remove them from the property. Hit that subscribe button for more information about the eviction process and other property law topics.